Thank you for being with us for this second part of our first class for the Inquirer's class for 2025 for St. George's. I hope you enjoyed our first section on Anglican history and the history of our Episcopal Church. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of the church and the way in which it is put together and based. Our church is generally put together in three sort of consecutively larger pieces. There is the local church, there is then the diocesan level of structure, and then on top of that, there is the larger church, what used to be called the national church for a long time, but now is generally just referred to as the larger church. As we look at the local church and see here a picture of St. George's from warmer and sunnier times than we're currently experiencing, the local church is whatever your local congregation is. For us, it's St. George's. For whoever else, it may be their church in their city or town, the one they attend. And every local congregation is going to have, or every local parish will have a vestry. There's also missions, but those are a slightly different thing that'll have mission committees that have some of the same responsibilities, but are not exactly the same. All vestries are elected by their congregation. When they gather together for their yearly annual meeting, their bylaws will instruct them about how many people they elect. Here at St. George's, we elect 5 each year for a 3-year term. So we have a total vestry of 15. Out of that 15, they will elect for themselves a senior and junior warden. The senior wardens traditionally have a responsibility of overseeing the relationship between the parish and the clergy. And the junior warden is usually, historically, more responsible for the grounds. Canonically, the vestry is responsible for finances and the relationship between the clergy and congregation. The vestry have pretty much total control over the financial resources of a congregation, unless there are specific policies like an endowment given or a trust established. Barring those, the vestry basically gets to choose how the money the church takes in is spent every year and what it is spent on. They also are ones who hire clergy at the end or hire rectors at the end of search processes and then work with the bishop and rector to maintain that healthy relationship throughout a priest's call and tenure there at a congregation. Now, practically, it's a little different. Canonically, their authority is sort of limited to financial matters, but practically, in healthy congregations, most often, the vestry works with the rector on a much wider and broader set of uh, interests. They work on ministry and liturgy. What does the service look like and what are the times? They'll work on programming and putting together fellowship and Christian education offerings. They'll work together on the corporate life of the parish, all the pieces that come together to make each parish its individual picture. The vestry should, in a healthy place, usually have a hand in all of those, or at the very least, know what's going on so that they can help lead as needed. At every congregation, also, there are usually clergy. At the congregational level, there's usually two of our orders of clergy are represented, priests or deacons. Priests or presbyters comes from the presbyteros, the Greek word for priests in the New Testament, have a number of canonical roles. They are mostly responsible at their center for administering the sacrament. This means blessing Eucharists, baptizing people, performing marriages, last rites, all of the sacramental actions except for ordination and confirmation, which are the purview of bishops. But the other two sacramental rites or two sacraments and the other three sacramental rites are all in the purview of the clergy. They also declare absolution and offer blessings to people. They serve as pastor to the congregation, responsible for the pastoral care and concern of the flock they are leading. They lead worship and liturgy. Canonically, clergy are given in the same way vestries have huge and overarching authority over finances. Clergy generally are given huge and overarching authority over liturgy and the use of space in a church. But in the same way that it is healthy for vestries to work with clergy in developing budgets and how we're going to spend money and having that more conversationally together, it's really healthy for the clergy to have any liturgical decisions be part of a conversation with the vestry rather than sort of single-minded or heavy-handed decision making. And finally, they are called to proclaim the gospel, to preach and teach. both in the pulpit and without. They are called to spread the gospel around throughout their community and to stand up as uh, exemplars as best they can of the life we are called to live in Christ. Whereas priest's role is more focused inward into the congregation, deacons historically have been more focused outwards. In the early church, deacons were folks who would be appointed by bishops or priests to go out into the outside the congregation, into the fields and the villages and towns outside of large enough places to have churches, and interact with believers there, to check in on people in need, to care for those who could not care for themselves. Deacons also serve a couple of distinct roles in the liturgy of the church. So if you have a deacon present in the congregation, they will be the one who proclaims the gospel at the service. They'll also often be the one who leads the prayers of the people, as the idea is the deacons are sent out amongst the people and then they come back bearing the prayers of the people with them. Oftentimes, deacons will be focused on an outreach beyond the walls of the church. This will often mean they're focused on a specific outreach ministry of the church, though not always. Sometimes they have a broader role rather than one that is that specific. As we move beyond the local level, our next tier is the diocesan level. The diocese is the basic building block of the Episcopal Church. In many ways, rather than being one big church with a bunch of dioceses, instead, we are a bunch of dioceses combined into one big church. By that I mean the diocese is the centerpiece of our corporate life. The word episcopus, which is the word we use to get our name from, episcopal, means bishop in Greek, and is the word used to refer to bishops in the early church. And it's that role of bishops, this role of sort of shepherds of a number of congregations, that we seek to reflect as we use that term to center and build our church around. There are 110 dioceses in the Episcopal Church, and as I've mentioned, they are not all contained within the boundaries of the United States. Some are outside in territories like Puerto Rico, and others are even in other countries, which we'll come to soon. Our diocese is the Diocese of West Tennessee. It was created in 1983. It was when we split Tennessee into three dioceses. Oftentimes, and I think originally all of the dioceses in the Episcopal Church were dioceses that were a singular state. But over time, as that's proved either less functional for logistical reasons or as common cultural bonds have seemed more significant than the state bonds, sometimes we've broken dioceses we've broken a state into multiple dioceses, as has happened in Tennessee. Sometimes there are dioceses that cross state lines. The Diocese of the Gulf Coast is one that is southern Alabama and the panhandle of Florida. The diocese is not quite strictly defined by states generally, but ours has some definition from that. Our motto, Ubique Inter Flumina, the land between the rivers, defines two of our natural boundaries, the Mississippi River to the west and the Tennessee River to the east. But the north and south of our diocese are still defined by Tennessee's state borders. So we take up that section of the state, and it's there that we minister. All 29 of our active congregations, counting both parishes and missions, exist within that space, and we come together to serve under one bishop. That bishop currently is Bishop Phoebe Roaf, the Right Reverend Phoebe Roaf. She is the fourth bishop of West Tennessee. She's responsible for oversight of congregations and clergy, maintaining pastoral relationships with her clergy, and shaping the diocesan ministries and vision. She also has the sacramental roles of ordaining and confirming, of ordaining new clergy to the roles of priest or deacon, and of confirming new adult believers into the Episcopal Church, as well as receiving and reaffirming believers. Our diocesan staff has a couple of unique positions. There are things we refer to as canons, who have sort of broad authority gifted to them by the bishop over specific areas of ministry. We have two canons in our diocese. Alyssa Kelly is the canon for finance and administration, and the Reverend Rob Courtney is our canon to the ordinary. The ordinary is another term we use for the bishop. And so Canon Rob's role is to serve as a canon to the bishop, taking up work that she assigns him in particular and assisting her in her work around the diocese. The rest of our diocesan staff is also called by the bishop. They help guide administration, they help in development of financial resources, they work with children's ministry in some dioceses, and do a whole lot more. They keep the diocese functioning in many ways, and they assist parishes in either questions we have or in problems that may arise. The diocesan staff is there for us to reach out to. Our diocese also features a number of committees as well as our annual convention. Every diocese across the Episcopal Church has an annual convention called either that or annual council, depending. It's a yearly gathering of clergy and lay delegates elected from each of the various congregations around the diocese, as well as uh, the bishop and her staff. It but serves as the legislative body of the diocese. And one of its biggest responsibilities that comes up every once in a while is that it is the body that will elect the next bishop of the diocese when the current bishop announces or departs for their retirement. One of the big committees we have in our diocese is bishop and council. Most dioceses have some sort of committee that functions like this. It's one that exists as convention outside of convention. So when our annual convention is not in session, bishop and council have the authority to make financial decisions for the diocese, to help set the vision for the diocese and determine questions about ministry. In a lot of ways, you can make a rough approximation between bishop and council and the vestry. It's not a one-to-one ratio, but it is a close approximation of those responsibilities and authorities. Bishop and council meet quarterly, and they are elected yearly by convention in the same way we elect members for our vestry yearly at our annual meeting. Another major committee is our standing committee. Standing committees are established by the canons of the larger church. They serve as the bishop's council of advice, and they also sometimes take on episcopal authority in moments where you have the absence of a bishop through resignation or through death, or where a bishop is on sabbatical. The standing committee will hold that episcopal authority during that bishop's absence. They're also responsible for approving the disposition of all property as well as the indebting of those properties, and they approve the ordinations and oversee the ordination of clergy and oversee bishops' elections, both here in our diocese, but also have a role in overseeing bishops' elections across the larger church. Speaking of that larger church, it used to be called the Episcopal Church of the United States of America, but a few decades ago, our name changed to be just the Episcopal Church. That was in recognition of the fact that we were not just a church for the United States of America. We have dioceses here in the United States. That's where the majority of our dioceses are. But we also have dioceses, as you can see, in Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Haiti, Honduras, Puerto Rico, Taiwan, Venezuela, and the Virgin Islands. There's also extra diocesan congregations that are not technically included within dioceses, but have their own sort of unique structure in both Navajo land and also throughout the convocation of Episcopal churches in Europe. Running the larger church is our presiding bishop. Presiding bishops used to just be one of the longest serving bishops who would remain a diocesan bishop and add on the responsibilities of presiding bishop to their already large and loaded plate. But in modern times, we elect our presiding bishops at General Convention. They're elected for a 9-year term and are only allowed to serve a single term, at which point they can go back to being bishops and most of the time retire, but sometimes find other things to do. They're responsible for overseeing our national strategy and speaking for the church on national issues. Our current presiding bishop is the Most Reverend Sean Rowe, as you can see pictured here. General Convention is the legislative body of the Episcopal Church. It meets once every 3 years. It is, as I mentioned in our last video, a bicameral legislative body, much like the U.S. House of Congress, and most likely inspired by that body. Ours is a house, or it's a body with 2 houses, an upper and a lower house. The lower house is the House of Delegates, people elected for each general convention, clergy and lay people elected as delegates for their diocese. And then the upper house is the House of Bishops. Each bishop, when confirmed a bishop, consecrated a bishop, takes their seat in the House of Bishops at the next General Convention, and they can continue to serve, and they have seat and voice, I believe, until they die. Even as retired bishops, they still retain seat and voice, although I don't think they have a vote on every topic once they are retired officially. This setup, as you, if you know anything about American politics, may recognize, it leads to a slow-moving legislative process. It is not a fast-moving body. This is in many ways by design. There was a recognition that the church would continue as it had throughout its history to confront new issues and new questions, new topics would come up, and that rather than rushing headlong into them, it would be good for the church to exercise slow, considered progress. And so, for example, when we got a new prayer book in 1979, it took about 12 years from the time the first people were sent out to go and consider making a prayer book to when we finally voted to approve the prayer book that was made. This included a number of general conventions consecutively affirming the final draft that had been presented. There are some possible upcoming topics in future general conventions. We are once again talking about revising our Book of Common Prayer. As I just mentioned, we call the 1979 prayer book the new prayer book and the 1928 prayer book the old prayer book. If you're doing the quick math in your head, the old prayer book is 97 years old, and the new prayer book is a brisk 45 years young. So we will probably, in the next several years, be thinking about how we might change that, what it might look differently, what has changed theologically for us, gendered language, questions about human sexuality. All of these things would be things we would consider in a prayer book revision and how it might change the way we write the words that we say every week. We'll also be talking about church property, the schism that occurred in some dioceses after Gene Robinson's election in 2003 led to a lot of questions about how church property is held and who's responsible for it, and that is looking to be a continuing topic at General Convention going forward. And also considering some liturgical changes, questions about what exactly is the role of confirmation in our congregations and in our church, and what role it should play in the future, along with other questions. At an international level, we have what we call the Anglican Communion. So there's an interesting piece here where we are not a worldwide church. Our church, as it is, really ends with the Episcopal Church, this larger church that is not national, but is broadly American with some other dioceses included as well. That is our church. We are then connected through what we consider and sometimes term bonds of affection to the Archbishop of Canterbury as the titular and historical head of the Church of England, and therefore the historical head of this Anglican idea that we have shared between us. The Archbishop of Canterbury is in communion with other national churches and larger churches around the world, such as the Anglican Church of Canada or the Episcopal Church of Liberia. These congregations or these dioceses, or not even dioceses, these large church bodies, these conglomeration of dioceses that exist in other places around the world. And so we are connected through this sort of web of these bonds of affection, not just to our forebears in this Anglican tradition in England, but also to people in Liberia and Japan and Russia and Canada and South America and all over the world. Everywhere that there is an Anglican practicing, we are connected to them through this bond of our Anglican identity. Traditionally, there is limited oversight in this relationship because we're not one hierarchical church structure where we answer to the Archbishop of Canterbury like a Catholic church down the street might answer to the Pope. Instead, these bonds of affection don't come with disciplinary rubrics or punishment methods. And so there's not really a form of oversight, legislative or otherwise. And so in times of tension, like as it existed recently about issues of human sexuality, but existed in the 80s and 90s and continues to exist today about things like the ordination of women, there is tension in these moments. Oftentimes you may see bishops from what's sometimes referred to as the Southern Cone or organizations like GAFCON, which is a group of primates, which is what we call the head of one of these larger Anglican or Episcopal churches, come together and want to discipline or wag their finger at the Episcopal Church for something it's done. But the reality is, in the same way that we can't control where other churches are not ordaining women or doing other things that we might like them to do and think they should do theologically, they don't actually have an authority to control how we behave. This is one of those pieces of tension that is just part of being an Anglican and part of being tied together by these bonds of affection rather than by some sort of dogmatic doctrinal loyalty. At our international level, we do have a meeting that happens about every 10 years, though that's been off schedule recently. But usually it's about every 10 years, called the Lambeth Conference. This is a conference for every bishop across the world. Every Anglican and Episcopal bishop across the world is invited to come to Lambeth Palace, which is the Archbishop of Canterbury's home and sort of centerpiece. And they gather there together and discuss the nature of the church and the status of the church worldwide, the bonds of affection, and how do we maintain those and hopefully strengthen them, and to let people voice their problems or dissents with each other. Normally here, we would take questions if you had any, but as we are not together in person, what I'd love to invite you to do is hold on to any questions you have until our next time together. Or if you have a question and would like to send me an email or give me a text, you're welcome to do that, and I will try to respond as quickly as I can. Thank you for sticking around through this, and I hope to see you soon on a Sunday morning for the continuation of our confirmation or inquirers class towards confirmation, and look forward to talking with you more then. God bless you. Have a great day. Bye.